The Arizona Territory stretched endlessly beneath a blazing summer sun, where jagged red cliffs met an ocean of golden sand. The land was as beautiful as it was unforgiving. Every gust of wind carried dust across the desert floor, and every mile seemed to test the strength of those who dared cross it. Travelers often said the desert had a will of its own. It rewarded the prepared and punished the careless. Sarah Whitmore had never imagined she would be traveling alone through such a place. Only 6 months earlier, she had buried her husband, Thomas, a rancher whose laughter had once filled their small farmhouse in New Mexico. A sudden fever had taken him within days, leaving Sarah a widow at 28 with little more than a wagon, 2 horses, and a determination to start over. Friends had urged her to stay where she was, but the memories in that house had become too painful. Every chair, every fence post, every sunrise reminded her of the life she had lost. When word reached her that her late husband's cousin owned a small trading post near Fort Apache and was willing to help her begin again, Sarah packed what little remained of her belongings and set out west. It was a difficult journey, but she believed that somewhere beyond the mountains lay a future worth finding. For the first several days, the trip passed without incident. She followed well-traveled wagon routes, occasionally meeting merchants, soldiers, or other settlers heading in the opposite direction. But as she drew farther into the Arizona Territory, the roads became narrower and lonelier. One afternoon, dark clouds gathered unexpectedly over the distant hills. A violent dust storm swept across the desert with frightening speed. The powerful wind reduced visibility to only a few feet, sending sand swirling through the air like waves upon the sea. Sarah struggled to calm her frightened horses. "Easy," she called, shielding her face with one arm. "Easy now." But the animals panicked. One horse jerked sharply to the side, snapping part of the harness. The wagon lurched violently over hidden rocks before one wheel struck a deep rut. The entire wagon tilted dangerously. Sarah was thrown to the ground. By the time the storm passed, the wagon had rolled onto its side several yards away. One horse had broken free and disappeared into the desert. The other limped away with the damaged harness trailing behind it. Coughing through the dust, Sarah pushed herself to her feet. Her shoulder throbbed with pain where she had landed, and a long scrape ran along her forearm. Most of her water barrels had shattered during the accident, leaving only one small canteen hanging from her belt. She searched desperately for supplies, gathering whatever had survived the wreck. A blanket. A small revolver. Several biscuits. The nearly empty canteen. Nothing more. The nearest settlement was still many miles away. She had no choice but to continue on foot. Hour after hour she walked beneath the relentless sun. The heat shimmered across the landscape, making distant rocks appear to float. Her lips cracked from thirst, and every step became heavier than the last. As evening approached, Sarah spotted what looked like cottonwood trees in the distance. Water. At least she hoped so. Summoning the last of her strength, she stumbled toward them. Hidden between the trees was a narrow stream winding through smooth stones. She dropped to her knees beside the clear water and drank carefully, resisting the urge to gulp it too quickly. Relief washed over her. After filling her canteen again, she sat beneath the shade of a broad cottonwood tree. The cool breeze coming from the stream soothed her aching body. Exhaustion quickly overtook her. Her eyelids closed. She drifted into an uneasy sleep. Some distance away, another traveler had been watching. A young Apache hunter named Dakota moved silently through the trees. Barely 20 years old, he had spent his entire life learning to survive in the harsh desert. His father had taught him how to read broken branches, disturbed stones, and footprints almost invisible to anyone else. Earlier that afternoon, he had discovered signs of a wagon accident several miles away. Following the scattered tracks, he eventually found a lone woman asleep beneath the tree. He remained hidden behind a cluster of mesquite bushes, studying her carefully. She was clearly exhausted. Her clothes were torn from the fall, and dried blood marked her injured arm. Most importantly, she was alone. Dakota knew the desert well enough to understand what that meant. Without help, she might not survive another day. Yet approaching a settler was never a simple matter. Years of conflict had filled both sides with suspicion and fear. He had seen armed settlers fire upon Apache riders without warning, just as he knew some warriors distrusted anyone from the towns. Still, leaving an injured stranger to die was against everything his family had taught him. After a long moment of quiet thought, Dakota stepped from the shadows. His footsteps were slow and deliberate, careful not to startle her when she awoke. The fading sunlight filtered through the cottonwood leaves as the distance between them grew smaller, setting the stage for an encounter that neither of them could have imagined would change both of their lives forever. Sarah awoke with a start. For one terrifying moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the sound of rushing water filled her ears, and the memories of the overturned wagon, the dust storm, and the endless walk across the desert came rushing back. She blinked against the afternoon sunlight. Someone was standing several yards away. Instinctively, her hand flew to the revolver resting beside her blanket. The stranger was young, perhaps no older than 20. He wore buckskin leggings decorated with simple beadwork, while a bow and a quiver of arrows rested against a nearby tree. His long black hair was tied behind his head with a leather strip. His posture was relaxed, yet there was no mistaking the confidence of someone completely at home in the wilderness. The moment their eyes met, neither of them moved. Sarah's heartbeat quickened. Every frightening story she had ever heard about Apache warriors echoed through her mind. Travelers had spoken of raids, ambushes, and disappearances. Whether those stories were true or exaggerated no longer mattered. Standing alone in the Arizona wilderness, she had no way of knowing who this young man really was. The Apache noticed her hand resting on the revolver. Instead of reaching for his own weapons, he slowly raised both empty hands, showing that he meant no harm. "I saw your wagon," he said in careful English. "It is broken." Sarah stared at him in surprise. She had expected him to speak only his own language. You speak English?" "A little," he replied with a faint smile. "Enough." She hesitated before removing her hand from the revolver. "My name is Sarah." He nodded once. "I am Dakota." The silence that followed was awkward. Neither knew what to say next. Finally, Dakota pointed toward the scrape on her forearm. "You are hurt." "It's nothing," Sarah answered quickly. He looked unconvinced. Without another word, he walked toward a patch of low-growing plants near the stream. Kneeling among them, he gathered several broad green leaves and crushed them together with a smooth stone until they formed a thick paste. Returning slowly, he stopped several feet away. "Medicine," he explained. Sarah eyed the mixture suspiciously. "It will help." Though uncertain, she could see genuine concern in his expression. Carefully extending her injured arm, she allowed him to spread the cool herbal paste across the scrape. The burning sensation faded almost immediately. "It actually feels better," she admitted. Dakota gave a small shrug, as though it were nothing remarkable. "My grandmother taught me." Sarah couldn't help smiling for the first time in days. "Then your grandmother is wiser than most doctors I've met." He chuckled softly. As the afternoon wore on, Dakota searched the nearby woods for food. He returned with fresh berries, edible roots, and 2 fish caught from the stream using nothing more than a sharpened spear. Sarah watched in amazement. "You caught those already?" He nodded. "The stream provides." While he prepared a small cooking fire, Sarah unpacked the last of her biscuits. "It isn't much," she admitted. Dakota accepted one politely before roasting the fish over the flames. For the first time since leaving home, Sarah enjoyed a warm meal. Later, after they had eaten, Dakota walked downstream carrying his hunting knife. Sarah noticed him kneel beside the water to clean away the dust and sweat from his long journey. Not wishing to intrude, she turned her gaze toward the distant cliffs. A few moments later she heard splashing. Curiosity got the better of her. She glanced in his direction. Dakota had removed his buckskin shirt and was washing in the shallow stream, completely unconcerned about being seen. His people viewed bathing in nature as perfectly ordinary, and there was no embarrassment in it. The instant Sarah realized she had looked, she gasped and spun around, her cheeks turning bright red. "Oh. I'm terribly sorry." Dakota looked over his shoulder, puzzled by her reaction. Then a grin slowly spread across his face. Unable to resist teasing her, he called out with a laugh. "Is this the first time the lady has seen a naked man?" Sarah covered her face with one hand. "Certainly not," she protested, though her voice betrayed her embarrassment. "I was married." Dakota laughed even harder. "Then why do you look so frightened?" "I'm not frightened." "You jumped like you saw a mountain lion." "I most certainly did not." "You almost fell over." She sighed dramatically. "You are impossible." Still smiling, Dakota dipped another handful of water over his shoulders before pulling his shirt back on. "You settlers are strange." "And why is that?" "You fear many things." Sarah folded her arms. "We simply believe some things are private." Dakota considered her answer for a moment. "In my people, the river does not care." His simple reply made Sarah pause. She realized that what embarrassed her was perfectly ordinary to him. Neither of them was wrong, they had simply been raised in different worlds with different customs. When Dakota returned to the campfire, an uneasy silence settled between them. Then Sarah unexpectedly laughed. Dakota looked up. "What?" "I suppose I did jump like I'd seen a mountain lion." He burst into laughter. Soon she was laughing too. The sound echoed gently through the trees, surprising them both. For the first time since Thomas's death, Sarah found herself laughing without forcing it. It was brief and unexpected, but it eased a burden she had carried for months. As evening settled over the desert, the awkward encounter became something else entirely, a shared joke between two strangers whose worlds could not have been more different. Neither of them realized that this small moment of humor had become the first brick in the foundation of an unlikely friendship. The first light of dawn spilled across the desert, painting the cliffs in shades of gold and crimson. Sarah awoke to the smell of fresh coffee brewing over a small campfire. She sat up slowly, surprised to find Dakota already awake, feeding dry mesquite branches into the flames. "You've been up for hours, haven't you?" she asked, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. Dakota smiled. "The desert wakes early." He handed her a warm tin cup. Though the coffee was weak, it tasted wonderful after the hardships of the previous day. "Thank you," she said sincerely. He nodded. "Today we travel." Sarah glanced toward her damaged belongings, neatly stacked beside the tree. During the night, Dakota had repaired the strap on her satchel with strips of rawhide and carved a sturdy walking stick from a young cottonwood branch. "You fixed these?" "They would not survive the journey otherwise." She ran her hand along the smooth wood of the walking stick. "You didn't have to." "I know." His simple answer caught her off guard. He hadn't helped because he expected gratitude or a reward. He had done it because someone needed help. After packing their few supplies, they began following a narrow trail that wound between rocky hills. Dakota walked ahead, scanning the ground as naturally as breathing. Sarah watched him with fascination. "You keep looking at the dirt," she said. "I look for stories." She frowned. "Stories?" Dakota pointed to a faint line of hoofprints pressed into the sand. "3 horses." Sarah stared. "I only see footprints." He crouched beside one of the tracks. "One horse carries a heavy load. See how deep the hoof sinks." She leaned closer. Now she noticed it. "The others are lighter." He nodded. "They passed this morning." "You can tell all that just by looking." Dakota smiled. "The ground speaks." As they continued walking, Sarah realized that Dakota observed things she would never have noticed. Broken twigs, disturbed stones, feathers caught on bushes, even the direction birds flew, all of it formed a picture in his mind. To him, the desert was not empty. It was alive. Around midday they stopped beneath a rocky overhang to escape the scorching sun. Sarah opened the last of her biscuits and offered one to Dakota. "You've shared your food with me," she said. "It's only fair." He accepted it with a grateful nod. After a few moments of silence, Sarah spoke again. "My husband loved the outdoors." Dakota looked toward her. "He taught me how to fish," she continued softly. "Though I was never very good at it." "You miss him?" It wasn't a question. She looked down at the biscuit in her hands. "Every day." The words came more easily than she expected. His name was Thomas. We had plans to build a larger ranch. We talked about children. She paused, swallowing hard. Then the fever came. Dakota remained silent, allowing her to finish in her own time. It happened so quickly. The desert breeze stirred the dry grass around them. Finally, Dakota spoke. "My father died when I was 15. Sarah looked up. He was hunting bighorn sheep in the mountains. A fall ended his journey. "I'm sorry." He nodded thoughtfully. "My grandfather said something I did not understand then." "What was it?" "Grief is like carrying water in your hands. Hold it too tightly, and it slips away. Hold it gently, and it stays only as long as it should." Sarah repeated the words quietly. "They're beautiful. I did not believe them then. And now?" He looked toward the endless horizon. "Now I do." The conversation lingered in Sarah's mind as they resumed walking. For the first time since Thomas's death, she had spoken openly about her husband without feeling completely overwhelmed by sorrow. That afternoon they encountered a narrow canyon where the trail disappeared among towering rocks. Dakota suddenly raised his hand. Sarah stopped immediately. "What is it?" He pointed toward the sand. "Fresh wolf tracks. They hunt nearby." Sarah instinctively reached for her revolver. Dakota gently lowered her hand. "They avoid people if we remain calm." Sure enough, moments later a pair of wolves appeared briefly atop a ridge, watching the travelers from a safe distance before disappearing among the rocks. Sarah exhaled slowly. "I would have frightened them." "Perhaps. You've spent your whole life out here." "Yes. I've spent mine believing this land was something to conquer." Dakota looked at her curiously. "And now?" She glanced across the vast desert stretching toward the distant mountains. "Now I think it asks to be understood instead." He smiled. "You learn quickly." As evening approached, they reached the crest of a hill overlooking miles of untouched wilderness. The setting sun bathed the valley below in warm amber light. "It is beautiful," Sarah whispered. Dakota nodded. "My people say every mountain remembers those who walk beside it." She smiled. "I hope these mountains remember us kindly." The young Apache looked at her for a long moment. When they had first met, he had seen only another frightened settler. Now he saw a woman willing to question what she thought she knew. And Sarah, who had once viewed every Apache through the lens of fearful stories, now saw not a stranger to fear, but a thoughtful young man with wisdom, kindness, and a deep respect for the land. Step by step, conversation by conversation, the distance between their two worlds grew a little smaller. Neither of them noticed the faint column of smoke rising far beyond the western hills, a sign that others were moving through the desert, and that the peaceful journey they had begun together would soon be tested in ways neither could yet imagine. The following morning, the desert was unusually quiet. Sarah had begun to recognize the rhythms of the wilderness during the days she had traveled with Dakota. Birds greeted the sunrise with cheerful calls, lizards darted across warm rocks, and the wind carried the scent of sagebrush through the canyons. Today, there was only silence. Dakota stopped walking so abruptly that Sarah nearly bumped into him. "What is it?" she whispered. He crouched beside the trail and examined the ground. Several fresh hoofprints crisscrossed the sandy path. Unlike the tracks he had shown her before, these were scattered and hurried, as though the riders had been searching for something. 5 horses, he said quietly. Maybe 6. You can tell that? He nodded. They are not traveling together. They are hunting. Sarah felt a chill despite the growing heat. Hunting what? Dakota looked toward the distant hills. I do not know. They left the trail and climbed a rocky slope where thick juniper bushes offered concealment. From the ridge, Dakota studied the valley below. A cloud of dust drifted across the plain. Horsemen. Sarah counted 5 riders moving slowly through the valley. Their clothes were worn, their hats pulled low against the sun, and each carried a rifle across his saddle. They don't look like soldiers, she murmured. They are not. As the riders came closer, Sarah noticed the leader's unshaven face and weathered black coat. His movements were calm, but there was something dangerous in the way he scanned the landscape. Dakota lowered himself behind the rocks. We stay hidden. The riders eventually stopped near the remains of Sarah's overturned wagon. One of them climbed down and searched through the broken supplies. Another held up a torn piece of Sarah's shawl. The leader snatched it from his hand. They found my wagon, Sarah whispered. Dakota nodded grimly. They know someone survived. Sarah frowned. But why would they care? Dakota didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched as the men spread out, searching the surrounding area. We leave, he said. Now. They slipped quietly down the opposite side of the ridge, careful to stay out of sight. For nearly 2 hours they traveled through narrow washes and rocky ravines, leaving as little sign of their passing as possible. Finally, when they stopped to rest beneath a cluster of cottonwood trees, Sarah could no longer contain her curiosity. Who are they? I have seen men like them before. Bandits? Yes. She looked puzzled. But they searched my wagon. I don't have anything valuable. Dakota picked up her satchel. You are certain? She nodded. Only clothes, a family Bible, some letters, and... She paused. My husband's papers. What papers? She searched through the satchel until she found a weathered leather envelope. Thomas kept records for cattle shipments. Before he died, he agreed to deliver these documents to his cousin's trading post. Dakota studied the envelope. Have you read them? No. She untied the leather cord and unfolded the papers. Most contained lists of livestock, supply orders, and receipts. But tucked between them was another folded sheet, written in hurried handwriting. Sarah frowned. I've never seen this before. She read it silently. Her expression changed. What is it? Dakota asked. She looked up. It describes a shipment of army payroll money. Dakota remained silent. It says the money was stolen before it reached the fort. Thomas had written down the names of the men he believed were involved. She slowly lowered the paper. The leader's name is here. Dakota's eyes narrowed. The man in the black coat? She nodded. Cal Harlan. Dakota looked toward the western horizon. Then they do not hunt you. They're hunting these papers. Sarah suddenly understood. They think I know where the money is. But you do not. No. She folded the papers carefully and tucked them back into the envelope. A distant gunshot echoed through the canyon. Both of them froze. Another shot followed. The outlaws had discovered their trail. Dakota immediately stood. We must move. They hurried deeper into the rocky hills, weaving through towering boulders and narrow passages. Dakota deliberately led them across stretches of solid stone where hoofprints and footprints could not be followed. Behind them, faint voices echoed across the canyon. They're close, Sarah whispered. Dakota nodded. Too close. As they rounded a bend, they found themselves facing a steep cliff. There was no easy way forward. Sarah looked over her shoulder. The voices were growing louder. For a brief moment, fear threatened to overwhelm her. Dakota noticed. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We are not trapped. He pointed upward. Hidden among the rocks was a narrow ledge scarcely wide enough for one person at a time. We climb. Sarah looked up doubtfully. That doesn't seem possible. Dakota smiled. You trusted me yesterday. She met his eyes. Then, without another word, she nodded. Together they began climbing the steep path. Below them, the voices of the outlaws drifted closer as horses entered the canyon. One of the riders pointed toward the cliff. There, someone shouted. A rifle cracked. The bullet struck the rock below Sarah's foot, sending fragments of stone scattering into the air. She gasped but kept climbing. Dakota reached down from the ledge above and grasped her wrist firmly. Do not look down, he said. With one final effort, Sarah pulled herself onto the narrow shelf beside him. The outlaws reached the base of the cliff moments later, but the hidden path disappeared among the rocks, making it nearly impossible to follow. From their concealed position high above the canyon, Sarah and Dakota watched the frustrated riders search below. For now, they were safe. But both knew the chase had only just begun. Somewhere in Sarah's satchel lay a handful of papers that powerful and dangerous men were willing to kill to recover, and as long as she carried them, neither she nor Dakota would know peace. Night settled over the canyon, wrapping the cliffs in deep shadows. From their narrow hiding place high above the valley, Sarah and Dakota watched the outlaws' campfire flicker below. The men had made camp at the canyon's entrance, confident that their prey had nowhere to escape. Sarah sat with her back against the cool stone, clutching the leather envelope containing Thomas's papers. They're not giving up, she whispered. Dakota shook his head. No. He studied the camp below. The horses were tethered close together, and one man remained awake, pacing the edge of the firelight with a rifle over his shoulder. They expect us to move before morning, he said. What do we do? We leave before they wake. Sarah glanced at the steep trail they had climbed earlier. In the dark. Dakota smiled faintly. The moon is enough. Hours later, when the campfire had burned low and silence settled over the canyon, Dakota rose to his feet. It is time. Moving carefully, they followed the narrow ledge that wound around the cliff face. Every step demanded complete concentration. Loose stones tumbled into the darkness below, disappearing without a sound. Sarah gripped the rocky wall tightly. I'm trying not to look down, she whispered. You are doing well. His calm voice steadied her nerves. They had almost reached the end of the ledge when disaster struck. A section of rock beneath Sarah's boots suddenly crumbled. She cried out as the ground disappeared beneath her. Without hesitation, Dakota lunged forward and caught her wrist. For a terrifying moment she dangled above the canyon, her feet searching desperately for solid ground. Don't let go, she gasped. I won't. Bracing himself against the rock, Dakota pulled with all his strength. Slowly, inch by inch, Sarah climbed back onto the ledge. Breathing heavily, she collapsed beside him. You saved my life. He offered a small smile. You would have done the same. Sarah wasn't so sure, but she hoped he was right. The noise had awakened the outlaws below. Up there, a voice shouted. Lanterns flared to life across the canyon floor. Rifles cracked through the darkness. Bullets struck the cliff around them, sending chips of stone flying. Run! Dakota called. They raced along the ledge until it widened into a rocky trail leading toward the hills beyond the canyon. The outlaws scrambled after them, climbing as quickly as they could. Dakota knew they couldn't outrun horses forever. He spotted a narrow ravine ahead. This way. The twisting passage forced the riders to dismount, slowing their pursuit. Sarah stumbled over a loose rock, nearly falling again. I'm slowing you down. No. You could escape alone. Dakota stopped and looked directly at her. We leave together. The simple words gave her strength. As dawn broke over the mountains, they reached an old wooden bridge spanning a deep gorge. Years of weather had weakened its planks, and several sections had already collapsed. Sarah stared at it uneasily. Is it safe? Dakota examined the ropes. It will hold. For both of us. He hesitated. I hope. Behind them came the unmistakable sound of approaching horses. They had no choice. Dakota crossed first, testing each step carefully. The bridge creaked and swayed over the rushing river below. Halfway across, he turned. Come. Taking a deep breath, Sarah stepped onto the bridge. Each board groaned beneath her boots. She kept her eyes fixed on Dakota instead of the water far below. Just as she reached the middle, the first outlaw appeared at the canyon entrance. There they are, he shouted. Cal Harlan himself rode to the front, raising his rifle. Don't shoot, another outlaw yelled. The papers. Cal ignored him. He fired. The bullet snapped one of the bridge's support ropes. The entire bridge lurched violently. Sarah lost her balance. She grabbed the remaining rope as the bridge tilted sharply. Several planks broke away, falling into the gorge. Dakota rushed toward her despite the bridge's violent swaying. Take my hand. She reached out. Their fingers touched, but slipped apart. Behind Dakota, another rifle shot rang out. This time the second support rope frayed, hanging by only a few strands. Without thinking, Sarah shouted, Go. Save yourself. Dakota shook his head fiercely. No. He lay flat on the bridge, stretching as far as he could. This time, don't let go. Sarah reached again. Their hands locked together. With a powerful pull, Dakota dragged her onto the remaining planks just as the last rope snapped. The bridge collapsed behind them with a deafening crash, crashing into the river below. Cal Harlan reined in his horse at the edge of the gorge, glaring helplessly across the gap. His prey had escaped. For now. Sarah sank to the ground, exhausted. She looked at Dakota, whose hands were scraped and bleeding from the rough ropes. You could have died. So could you. She smiled through tears. I think we're even now. He laughed softly. No. She raised an eyebrow. You still owe me one fish. Despite everything they had endured, Sarah laughed, a genuine, carefree laugh that echoed across the gorge. Dakota joined her. The danger had not ended, but something far more important had been forged in its place. They were no longer a widow and a stranger brought together by chance. They were partners. Bound not by blood or obligation, but by trust, courage, and the willingness to risk everything for one another. Together, they turned toward the distant trading post, where the truth hidden in Thomas's papers could finally be revealed, and where the last chapter of their journey awaited. 3 days after escaping the canyon, Sarah and Dakota finally reached the outskirts of Fort Apache. The trading post stood a short distance beyond the military buildings, surrounded by corrals, supply wagons, and a handful of adobe homes. After days of traveling through empty wilderness, the sight of people going about their daily lives felt almost unreal. Sarah let out a long breath. We made it. Dakota smiled, though his eyes remained alert. Not yet. She understood what he meant. Cal Harlan and his gang were still at large, and the papers in her satchel remained valuable evidence. As they approached the trading post, a gray-haired man hurried from the porch. His face was lined with worry, but the moment he recognized Sarah, relief flooded his expression. Sarah, he exclaimed. Thank heavens. We've been expecting you for over a week. She recognized him from Thomas's description. Mr. Benjamin Carter. He nodded warmly. Your husband was my cousin. We feared the worst when you never arrived. Before Sarah could answer, Dakota quietly stepped back, giving them space. Benjamin noticed him and offered a respectful nod. Your friend brought you here. Sarah looked toward Dakota and smiled. He did much more than that. He saved my life more than once. Benjamin extended his hand. Then you have my deepest thanks. After a brief hesitation, Dakota accepted the handshake. Though their cultures greeted one another differently, the gesture carried genuine respect. Inside the trading post, Sarah carefully placed Thomas's leather envelope on the large wooden desk. I think you'll want to read these. Benjamin unfolded the papers one by one. At first, they appeared to be ordinary business records. Then he reached the final page. His expression darkened. Where did you find this? It was hidden among Thomas's papers. Benjamin read the names again. I knew something about the payroll robbery never made sense. He immediately called for the fort's commanding officer. Within the hour, soldiers were examining the documents. Thomas had secretly recorded details that connected Cal Harlan and several of his companions to the theft of the army payroll months earlier. The evidence was enough to justify a warrant for their arrest. One officer looked at Sarah. Mrs. Whitmore, these papers may finally bring those men to justice. She lowered her eyes. I only wish Thomas had lived to see it. The officer removed his hat respectfully. So do I. Over the following days, patrols spread across the territory searching for Harlan's gang. Without safe places to hide or people willing to protect them, the outlaws were gradually captured. Some surrendered peacefully, while others attempted to flee into the desert and were arrested before they could escape. News of the arrests reached the trading post a week later. Benjamin folded the newspaper with satisfaction. It's over. Sarah looked toward the open window. For the first time in many months, she felt that a chapter of her life had truly come to an end. Thomas's name had been cleared. Justice had been served. Now she could finally begin building a future instead of living only in the past. That evening, Sarah found Dakota standing on a hill overlooking the valley. The setting sun painted the mountains in brilliant shades of orange and crimson. You've been avoiding everyone, she said. He smiled faintly. My people are waiting. She nodded. I suppose they are. Neither spoke for several moments. The silence between them was comfortable now, no longer awkward. Finally, Sarah reached into her satchel and removed the cottonwood walking stick Dakota had carved for her. I thought you might want this back. He shook his head. It belongs to you. I'll keep it. It will remind you. Of the desert? He smiled. Of what you learned there. Sarah looked across the endless landscape. When I began this journey, I thought this land was empty. And now? Now I know it is full of life, if you know how to see it. Dakota nodded approvingly. You have good eyes now. She laughed softly. I had a very patient teacher. He chuckled. There were difficult lessons. There certainly were. She hesitated before speaking again. I owe you more than I can ever repay. You owe me nothing. I disagree. She reached into her pocket and produced a small silver pocket watch. It had belonged to Thomas and no longer worked, but she had carried it ever since his death. I want you to have this. Dakota examined the watch without opening it. It was your husband's. Yes. Then you should keep it. I've carried it because I was afraid of letting go. She gently closed his hand around it. But Thomas taught me that kindness should never be repaid with fear. Dakota accepted the gift quietly. I will honor it. The evening breeze stirred the tall grass around them. As they walked back toward the trail, Dakota suddenly stopped. A familiar grin crossed his face. There is one thing I still wonder. Sarah folded her arms, already guessing what he was about to say. Oh. He looked at her with playful amusement. Is this still the first time the lady has seen a naked man? Sarah stared at him for a heartbeat. Then she burst into laughter, louder than she had laughed in years. You are never going to let me forget that, are you? No. She shook her head, smiling. I suppose that's fair. For a moment, they simply stood there laughing together, remembering the awkward meeting beside the stream that had started everything. Then the laughter faded into a warm silence. Sarah extended her hand. Dakota looked at it, then clasped it firmly. May your road be long, he said. And may yours always lead you home, she replied. He released her hand, turned toward the mountains, and began walking. His figure grew smaller with each step until it blended into the vast desert he knew so well. Sarah watched until he disappeared beyond the ridge. Only then did she turn back toward the trading post. She was no longer the frightened widow who had stumbled through the desert alone. She carried grief, but it no longer controlled her. She carried memories, but they no longer chained her to the past. The journey had given her something she had never expected to find, not just survival, but understanding. Sometimes the greatest distances are not measured in miles across a desert, but in the space between two strangers willing to trust one another. And sometimes, all it takes to cross that distance is a single act of kindness, and an awkward joke that becomes a cherished memory.